Good evening once again. I'm Chris Jansing in for Brian Williams. Day 197 of the Biden administration. Tonight, the Delta variant surge shows no signs of easing, and the newest data tell a troubling story. The daily average of new cases in the U.S. is now nearing 90,000. We haven't been here since mid-February. Health officials in two of the hardest hit states, Texas and Florida, say the new reality is reflected in the situation on the ground.
The 7-day average of new cases is up 92% from last week. Hospitalizations are up 49%. Fatalities are up 15%. So those are all going in the wrong direction.
The numbers of patients are unprecedented, and that's in black and white. We have more patients in our hospital now than ever before.
This Delta variant surge has been particularly intense across the South. One expert says the next few weeks will be critical in determining if that trend takes hold across the nation.
We have all 50 states, the District of Columbia, seeing increases in cases. And the question is going to be if any of them turn out to be like we're seeing in the South, then we've got even a much larger problem in our hands going forward. If not, I think that by the early part of September, we'll see this curve come down. But in the meantime, it's going to extract a tremendous amount of pain from us in society.
Dr. Anthony Fauci also has some ominous new warnings about the virus. In an interview with McClatchy News, he warned the current surge could amount to as many as somewhere between 100 and 200,000 cases a day. Fauci added, if we don't crush the outbreak to the point of getting the overwhelming proportion of the population vaccinated, the virus will continue to smolder through the fall into the winter. There could be a variant that's lingering out there that can push aside Delta. Then we could really be in trouble. Tonight, the White House is said to be weighing new vaccine mandates for those who want to come into the U.S. An administration official tells NBC News a plan is in the works to require foreign visitors to the U.S. be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Right now, the CDC says a little less than 50% of Americans are fully vaccinated. And while experts say vaccinations are the key to stopping the spread of the virus, they also say Delta changed the rules when it comes to masks, even among the fully vaccinated. Today, the governor of Illinois joined those reimposing mask mandates. Face coverings will now be required in Illinois schools.
Because the vaccine has not yet been approved for children under 12, because there are many people who are reluctant across some of the districts to adopt the CDC's guidance, effective immediately, all P12 schools and daycares in Illinois must follow the CDC guidance of universal masking inside, regardless of vaccine status.
Of course, the return of masks means the return of partisan battles over them. The political sparring between President Biden and Florida's Republican governor has escalated. One day after Biden called out governors who have moved to ban masks and other mitigation strategies, the White House came to his defense.
That wasn't an evaluation, a partisan evaluation or assessment. That was an assessment of what isn't happening. There are leaders who are not stepping up and are getting in the way of the American people, companies, and others who are trying to save lives and stop the spread of Delta. And we are going to keep calling that out. That's not meant to be partisan. It's not meant to be political. It's just meant to convey that more action is needed.
At nearly the same time, roughly 900 miles south of Washington, here's what Florida's Ron DeSantis was saying.
Joe Biden has taken to himself to try to single out Florida over COVID. And what is his big solution? What is he so upset about Florida? His solution is he wants to have the government force kindergartners to wear masks in school. He thinks that should be a decision for the government. Well, I can tell you in Florida, the parents are going to be the ones in charge of that decision. So why don't you do your job? Why don't you get this border secure? And until you do that, I don't want to hear a blip about COVID from you.
DeSantis is now using his current feud with Biden to raise funds from supporters. But another Republican governor, Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, is having regrets about signing a statewide ban on masks in schools. His entire state is now designated as a region with a high rate of COVID transmission. So the governor is calling the Republican-led state legislature back into session to try to reverse the ban that he signed in April.
I signed it at the time because our cases were at a very low point. Everything has changed now. And yes, in hindsight, I wish that had not become law.
This renewed battle over masks comes just as many as 1 million people are expected to gather in Sturgis, South Dakota. That's for the annual motorcycle rally, which kicks off on Friday. And just like a year ago, there's the concern it'll be a super spreader event. Few attendees wore masks last year, and that's likely to be the case again this year. So, Eugene, there's this new Quinnipiac poll out finding a 12% drop in Joe Biden's approval rating when it comes to handling COVID. 53% approve now. It was 65% in May, just 3 months. Since January, the Biden White House has become kind of entwined with this whole premise, right, of handling the pandemic. In fact, even before that, he ran on it. So what do they do now at the White House?
Yeah, I mean, that is the number one threat that they said when they walked into the door, right? They said that is their number one focus. It was the first big bill that was signed and pushed out. They've talked about the COVID relief plan over and over and over again. And so they know this is the thing they have to get under control in this country. You know, when you talk to folks, even behind the scenes, when, you know, they're on background, they don't seem scared, right? They feel really like sure-eyed and sober about what's happening right now and what that means for their political future. But they also try to keep politics out of it. I know that sounds kind of Pollyanna-ish, but when you're talking to them, they are talking about what the doctors are saying. You know, they're talking about Delta from the viewpoint of what science is saying. And so those are the things that this White House is concentrating on. And that doesn't always make for good politics, right? Concentrating on the science, following the science where it may lead, even if it led to people putting masks back on, right? That's very unpopular. People see, and they're also hearing a lot, especially from right-wing media, this idea that there's going to be lockdowns again, even though Jen Psaki has said that is not something that's really on the table at this point. And so there's all of these different factors making everyone look at the Biden White House, who promised to get COVID under control, make us go back to normal life, as Delta's kind of resurging, and we're seeing all of these issues happening, less people getting vaccinated, all of that. But it's not just on the White House, right? All these states and locales also have an arm to play as well.
Yeah, and Julie, to that point, we're witnessing that escalating war of words between the White House and Florida's Governor DeSantis. I mean, he's not alone among Republican governors, but he certainly is the most vocal. What's really going on here? What are the political undercurrents to what we're seeing and hearing?
Well, I think there are a couple of things at play here. Look, just from a policy standpoint, Biden does have to lean on governors because there's only so much that he can do on his own as president. And I know sometimes that sounds a little silly, but that is the reality of our system of government, that Biden can advise, he can tell governors what he thinks they should do, but ultimately it's governors who have more of the control in their states when it comes to what state employees should be doing, when it comes to what businesses should be doing, what schools should be doing. So he's trying to ramp up the pressure there. There is a political undercurrent here. And I agree with Eugene that I think the White House is trying to keep politics out of this, but we live in a very political time. And so Ron DeSantis is somebody who has his eye on 2024, and he wants to set himself up every which way he can in opposition to Joe Biden. He wants to show that his state is open, that his state is not going to be taking restrictive measures. Ron DeSantis does have to deal with the fact, though, that while he is taking that position, cases in his state are reaching record levels here. So how he tries to calibrate that, I think, will be fascinating to watch. And Biden, on the other hand, while again, I think he would like to try to keep politics out of this, he knows that his own politics are going to be driven by how he handles the pandemic. He wants to look like he's the responsible adult. He wants to look like he is the one who is trying to keep the country safe and paint some of these Republican governors as really being reckless.